are likely this weekend. Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About on GB News with me, Alex Phillips, where we get stuck into the issues that we should be looking at in depth. Nothing is off the table and nobody will be cancelled for saying what they think. Keeping me company today is Joanne Nadler, Conservative political commentator, and here's what we've got coming up on the show. There's been a tense standoff at PMQs this afternoon over Partygate and the highly anticipated Sue Gray report. So is this crunch time for Boris Johnson? And adding even more pressure on the PM are fresh claims he put pets ahead of people during the Afghanistan crisis, with reports he personally authorised the evacuation of Pen Farthing's animals. And US President Joe Biden warns of enormous consequences for Russia if Putin makes a move on Ukraine. But will his warning be heeded? That's what we're talking about for the next hour. But what do you need to talk about? Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. But first, it's time for the news headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:01. I'm Rosie Wright to keep you up to date in the GB News newsroom. Now, the Prime Minister's spokesperson has confirmed that Number 10 still hasn't received the Sue Gray report into alleged parties at Downing Street during lockdown. Labour is demanding that the report be published in full after Cabinet Ministers suggested the findings may be redacted for security reasons. During Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer accused Boris Johnson of misleading Parliament and called for his resignation. He also says police are investigating the most serious and flagrant type of breach in the rules.
On the 8th of December, he told this House, "I will place a copy of the report in the library of the House of Commons." His spokesperson has repeatedly stated that means the full report, not parts of the report, not a summary of the report, not an edited copy. So can the Prime Minister confirm that he will publish the full Sue Gray report as he receives it?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we've got to leave the report to the independent investigator, as he knows, and of course, when I receive it, I will do exactly what I said.
Well, Conservative MP Jonathan Gillis says Labour's focus on Partygate allegations is distracting from the issues people care about.
The Prime Minister was on absolutely fine form, yet again giving a very clear punch on the nose to the Labour Party, who are obsessed with talking about, what's going on down here, rather than talking about the people's priorities. In Stoke-on-Trent, North Kids go and talk, they're talking about what's happening in Ukraine, because they fear about what could happen potentially with energy prices. They're worried about the cost of living. They're worried about making sure that we deliver on levelling up. So I hope Captain Hindsight and his shadow cabinet of nobodies will finally get out of the North Islington bubble and go and visit some real people outside of London.
In other news now, European diplomats are working to ease tension between Russia and Ukraine during talks today in Paris. Moscow has amassed around 100,000 troops on their border with Ukraine, and they've sent more fighter jets to Belarus, where they've been holding military drills. The US President Joe Biden has warned he'd consider personal sanctions against President Putin if Russia invades Ukraine. Russia expert Keir Giles told GB News Ukraine faces the possibility of air and missile strikes from Russia.
Even if it's not a land invasion, let's look at how Russia gets its way in military conflicts, as we've seen in, for example, Syria. They think that terrorizing the civilian population by bombarding them with air and missile strikes is a good way to win a war. So that is the kind of threat that Ukraine is actually now facing, and it's a real one because Russia does have both the capability and they've shown the will to do it.
An email published by the Foreign Affairs Committee reveals Boris Johnson authorised Pen Farthing and his animals to be evacuated from Kabul. Last summer, the former Marine who runs the Nawazad Animal Shelter campaigned to get his team and animals out of Afghanistan. The UK government sponsored clearance for the charter flight, leading to allegations that the animals have been prioritised over people in the rescue effort. During an interview in December last year, Boris Johnson was asked if he had authorised the evacuation and denied the claim.
No, that's complete nonsense, but what I can tell you is that I think that the operation of pitting to airlift 15,000 people out of Kabul in the way that we did over the summer was one of the outstanding military achievements of the last 50 years or more.
A woman's been arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a 5-year-old boy in Coventry. Police say it's believed the suspect knew the child. The boy was found with serious injuries at a property in Earlsdon. He was confirmed dead at the scene.
We were called to the Earlsdon area of Coventry, and when we arrived, found a young boy who was just short of his 6th birthday with multiple injuries. Despite the extensive efforts of police officers and paramedics, unfortunately nothing could be done to save him. We have arrested a 49-year-old woman. She is known to the family, and I would like to stress it is not the boy's mother.
From Friday, people in Wales who test positive for coronavirus will be able to finish self-isolating after 5 full days instead of 7. They'll still need to produce, though, 2 negative lateral flow tests taken on days 5 and 6. And in Northern Ireland, vaccine passports are being scrapped for hospitality venues and cinemas from midday. Nightclubs are also going to be allowed to reopen, along with the return of indoor standing events. You will, though, need to provide proof of jabs to access nightclubs and to go to a large event. Proposals are being put forward to ensure people behind the wheel of a self-driving car are not held legally responsible if they then have a crash. The Law Commission of England and Wales and the Scottish Law Commission want there to be immunity from prosecution if anything goes wrong, like speeding or running a red light. You're up to date here on GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now we need to talk about an Alex.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been on my own emotional roller coaster over Partygate. Forget an epic Downing Street hangover. I'm verging on checking myself into rehab to wean myself off the bombardment of allegations that Boris has more parties than a Balearic island. Like any drunk, at first it was incomprehensible, then mildly entertaining, then provoking boundless rage. Next thing, somebody called the police, and a woman called Sue is really not very happy. Now here I am, slumped in a post-Bender downer, head throbbing, trying to remember everything that has gone on while self-righteous opportunists start screeching that Brexit is over and everyone should be put on trial for having a glass of vino. It's exhausting. And it's left me with the sort of anxiety a suitcase full of claret and M&S gin in tins would definitely do to you. Well, grab those aspirin, folks, because it ain't over yet. In fact, the morning after the night before hasn't even begun. So, Partygate was front and centre at PMQs today. The Prime Minister was asked by Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer about the Sue Gray report.
So can the Prime Minister confirm that he will publish the full Sue Gray report as he receives it?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, what I can tell him is that we've got to leave the report to the independent investigator, as he knows, and of course, when I receive it, I will do exactly what I said.
Boris Johnson was also pressed on whether he will resign if he has misled Parliament.
The 8th of December, the Prime Minister told this House, I have been repeatedly assured since these allegations emerged there was no party. So since he acknowledges the ministerial code applies to him, will he now resign?
No, Mr. Speaker.
Well, joining me on the show now is GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey. Darren, we're all waiting on tenterhooks, aren't we, for the sword of Damocles to drop, the Gray report. What's the latest?
Yeah, indeed we are, Alex. And Downing Street, within the last hour or so, talking to us journalists, have said that they have still not received that report. When they do, just to talk you through the choreography of what we expect to happen, is that when they get the reports, the team behind me in Downing Street and the Prime Minister will go through it probably for a couple of hours. The expectation is that it will be then published to the opposition, to MPs in Parliament, and indeed to all of us. And then the Prime Minister will travel to the Commons, probably pretty swiftly after that, to answer questions and to make a statement. Now, the reason it's been held up, we think, because we know it's been concluded, is because it is being kind of trawled through, if you like, by lawyers, the HR departments, potentially the Cabinet Office and elsewhere, because this could have consequences, of course, for members of staff. And that is why things have been held up. Clearly, this police investigation has also complicated things. In essence, they do not want some of Sue Gray's report to cut across, if you like, the Met's investigation. But you're right, MPs essentially waiting with bated breath on all of this. It's going to be a significant moment. It will, I think, essentially make up minds for many of MPs whether to back or to sack Boris Johnson. We could see a leadership challenge flow from it, but it all really depends on the detail about potentially how damning it is. And that is why I think at the moment we're in this weird hiatus, and you saw it at Prime Minister's Question Time, didn't you, with Keir Starmer still trying to make these political points, the Prime Minister essentially saying he can't really say anything because these investigations, these two investigations, are essentially still up in the air.
I mean, he keeps reasserting, Boris, that he's not going to step down, but he's potentially not left himself with much choice because he's put all of his eggs in the basket of this inquiry. It seems to be all the Conservative MPs have been whipped to say we're going to wait on the inquiry. And if the inquiry comes back and says, oh, well, you know, nothing happened, people will call it a whitewash. If it's the opposite, then surely he's got to go.
Yeah, it's really, really tricky, and it's really tricky politics, and I'm not entirely sure how the Prime Minister is going to walk through that minefield, as you say, of all the possibilities that may well reveal themselves in that report. In the end, though, you're right, he was pretty defiant today. He is determined to carry on. He clearly doesn't think he's broken any rules. I think in the end, the decision probably will not be his to make if he is forced out of office. It will almost certainly come from MPs who want to see him go. He did say he would resign if he felt he'd broken the ministerial code. He's pretty clear he doesn't think he's done that. It's the same with the Met investigation. Pretty clear that he does not think he's broken any laws. But as I say, in the end, Alex, it will be other people who make those judgment calls and make those judgment calls on his leadership and his future in the hours, days and weeks to come. I think drawing this out, even if he is to remain in post, the wider question is, can he politically recover from this? There is no doubt he is a weakened Prime Minister compared to just a matter of months ago.
Darren, thank you, and do keep us updated as the drama unfolds. Well, joining me now is Sir Vince Cable, former leader of the Liberal Democrats. Sir Vince, will Boris Johnson survive this? Should he survive this?
Well, I don't think he should, but he may. I mean, the calculation that Conservative MPs have to make is First of all, can they get to the magic 54? There's individuals, of course, they don't know that. And if they miscalculate, they get into the kind of messy situation we had with Theresa May. They then have to judge as to whether something extraneous is going to change everything. You know, we could get conflict in Ukraine. The cynics are saying the government's praying for one to take public distraction away from the Partygate issues. They then have to calculate what would happen in a leadership contest, which could be very messy. The Conservative Party being forced to define what its objectives are and who can best deliver them. No, I mean, the problem of toppling an incumbent Prime Minister who doesn't want to go are very considerable. And there must be a lot of nervousness amongst Conservative MPs. And I'm not sure that the detail of the Sue Gray report is actually going to change it a great deal. I mean, it's public perceptions that matter.
And what would you do if you were a Conservative MP? Would you be handing in your letter to Sir Graham Brady? Or do you think, actually, frankly, he worked with these people day in, day out in a confined environment. If they happen to have, you know, a glass or two together at the end of a busy day, if that happens, then really what's the problem with that?
Well, you're putting me in the position of being a Conservative MP, and it's something in all modesty, I've never have been and wouldn't look forward to being. But of course, it depends where in the Conservative Party you are. I mean, there are quite a lot of people who are, you know, Theresa May loyalists who are very angry about what happened. There are strong pro-Brexiters and others who are closet Remainers. There are people in northern red wall seats, people in the prosperous south who have different interests and different styles of politics. And actually, for the Conservative Party, it's a very unusual situation. They've never had a complex coalition of quite this kind. And in the past, you know, we had the position of a few eminence gris going along to the Prime Minister and whispering in his ear and saying, time to go, old chap. I mean, that doesn't work anymore. They've got this complex coalition of very different kinds of MPs with different agendas. And they're going to have to make up their mind, and it's not going to be pretty or easy.
I mean, is the point here that what we're learning, being drip-fed to the media, is actually fairly revelatory about the true nature of Boris Johnson, that perhaps he's just not fit for the job?
Well, I think there have always been massive questions about character. I mean, nobody has, you know, disputed that. The problem is that the Tory MPs knew that when they voted for him. I mean, they knew he had a terrible track record in terms of honesty and integrity. And if it were a question of character, he'd have been gone a long time ago. But that actually isn't the issue. I mean, what has happened is that they voted for him knowing his flaws, and it's gone pear-shaped. And they will look foolish if to ditch somebody who actually, at least 2 years ago, delivered for them.
Does it worry you that this is going to affect the reputation of Britain on the world stage as we're sort of entering potentially a geopolitical crisis with the ongoing situation between Russia and the Ukraine, and we're really front and centre leading the world on intervening in that situation? But if the Prime Minister is proven to be a liar and a bit of a party boy, it doesn't really help him be a statesman, does it?
Well, it doesn't, but I'm not sure that Britain is actually at the centre of this current crisis, which is really very serious. I mean, what will determine the outcome, at least from the Western side, is the reactions of the United States and Germany. I mean, they're the big players. France has got a major role in it, and Britain, a role, but not a particularly major one. No, I think overseas countries, particularly the French, have sort of written off Boris Johnson a long time ago, so there's nothing new in all this. No, it doesn't help our image and reputation, for sure.
Sir Vince, thank you so much for coming on and giving me your take on this ongoing Partygate crisis. Well, here now to discuss this is Conservative MP for Lichfield, Michael Fabrica. Michael, lovely, always having you on the show. Boris is your boy, isn't he? Are you going to defend him no matter what the Gray report says?
Well, it depends what the Gray report says. But, you know, I'm not speaking to you from the House of Commons. I'm actually home in Lichfield, and I'm isolating because I've got COVID. I've got it very, very lightly, I might add. So this is not a sympathy vote, but it does mean that I can look at this thing objectively. And Vince Cable was talking just now about how we're perceived abroad. And I happen to know a little bit about how we're perceived abroad because I've been contacted by various people in Newfoundland, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Germany and elsewhere. And they really don't understand what's going on, in the sense that they're saying, you know, here is the UK, got out of the European Union, fastest economy in the whole of the G7, actually playing a role in negotiations with Ukraine. I think that's one area I'll disagree with Vince Cable on. And here we are having Partygate, or Cakegate, as I like to call it. And they just don't understand how the Brits can get so obsessed with such an issue.
I mean, do you think this is essentially a vendetta against Boris Johnson and a media just lapping it up because they love a straw man, they love a headline, they love being able to take down a government? Is that your feeling here? Or are there really serious question marks about the man leading the country, essentially, potentially breaking laws that he made and repeatedly stood behind a lectern to tell the public to follow?
Well, the question is, did he break the laws? I mean, this is the whole thing the Met Police and the Sue Gray report are going to talk about. I mean, the impression being given, if you read the media, and I'm not blaming the media because they're getting this information being fed them, I suspect, by a person who was sacked and wants to get his own back on Boris Johnson. But, you know, they're being fed the information that's being published. But I mean, you get the impression from it all that it's like your monologue at the beginning of the show. It sounds like an Ibiza night out. It sounds like Bacchanalia gone wild, people blowing party poppers and all the rest of it. Whereas, in fact, I think if there has been cakes involved, if there has been drinking involved, it's all people standing demurely around, from what pictures I've seen, at the end of a long, long day, working in closed, cramped offices and, you know, with no mixing involved. So in other words, no chance of actually spreading any disease. And we do know, don't we, that the disease spreads very rapidly in number 10. There are over 100 offices in numbers 9, 10, 11 and 12 Downing Street. This is a big complex of 3 houses knocked together. It goes back deeper than you would think when you actually see it from the front of the house, you know, from the front of the building where the cameras usually are. We know from the fact that Boris caught the disease, we know from the fact that others have caught the disease, how contagious the area is. So frankly, if the same people are meeting for a quiet drink or whatever they were doing, I'm not even sure they were breaking the law. This is something that we'll have to determine because they were in the workplace. And they were still working. A lot of them went straight back to work afterwards, if indeed they were actually meeting for drinks anyway. And we'll find out how many there have been, or maybe there's only 1, maybe 2. But as I say, from outsiders' point of view, when they look at the success of the United Kingdom, when they see the popularity of Boris otherwise, because he does get to places rather like Heineken, which other prime ministers don't reach rather, they do rather find it all very strange. And that's why I can understand why people like Keir Starmer are so keen to get rid of Boris.
Well, I hear you, Michael. He may not have broken the law, but somebody broke that child's swing, and I want to get to the bottom of it. Michael Fabrica, Conservative MP for Lichfield. Always great having one, isn't it? Well, let's ask my studio guest, Conservative political commentator Joanne Nadler. What do you think about all this? Because, look, whether he broke the law or didn't break the law, something that concerns me is someone's behind this operation, leaking all these stories to the press, which at the very least reveals that Boris is not running a disciplined operation in his own house.
Well, we know he hasn't been running a disciplined operation for many, many months. And to a certain extent, that's what has led to all of this. I mean, a sense of complete decay of the structure at number 10, which precedes by quite a long time this particular issue of parties. I mean, within a few weeks of Boris Johnson becoming the Prime Minister, we saw fairly senior and eminent people resigning from number 10, and that was even before the debacle with Dominic Cummings. It has, for a very long time, given the sense of an operation that was rudderless, leaderless, that wasn't able to either administer itself or really explain very clearly what the direction of travel was policy-wise. Now, of course, factored into all of this was the huge and unexpected circumstances of a pandemic. But it's incumbent on the government to be able to articulate its case, beyond dealing with the pandemic, and this has really been at risk for the many months now.
I mean, it seems to me that this just ties in so perfectly with Johnsonianism. That he'd be saying, well, come on, it's self-flagellation from puritanical types who think that it's dreadful to have a glass of wine. But the point is, he has now created a situation, whether or not this was a vendetta against him, he's created a situation where he will be held accountable by exactly what that inquiry says. And if it exonerates him, I don't think people are going to be happy. There'll be enough voices out there from the opposition saying, this is a whitewash, we don't believe it, do it all again. They've smelled blood and they're going for the neck now, aren't they?
They are going for the neck, and that's partly their role, although it'd been nice to have seen some proper opposition over the last couple of years when it comes to policy, but we can return to that. I think clearly what you say is significant, because it's very hard to see how, even in the best case scenario for Boris Johnson and his team, that the Sue Gray report isn't the final say on this. It's very hard to see for Conservative MPs, I think, how you draw a line under this, and what the mechanism for doing that would be. And I think that's why some of them might be moved to add their names to those calling for a vote of no confidence, because at least if there were a vote of confidence, or no confidence as the case may be, that would be some method of at least bringing this to a head, if that isn't already sorted out by the Sue Gray inquiry, or indeed what we may hear from the Metropolitan Police, although that's obviously some way off.
I mean, just very briefly before we go to an advert break, what part of this whole affair really gets your goat? Is it the little mini fridge with the suitcase full of booze? Is it the broken swing? Is it the lying to Parliament? Is it the sort of flip-flopping and disingenuousness of, I did it, no, I didn't do it?
Do you know, Alex, I have to say none of that particularly bothers me. And people will take from it what they want to, what particularly concerns them. I'm far more concerned about the fact that there were people who weren't allowed to visit their dying relatives, so that there were these quite extraordinarily draconian and in many cases I think inhumane regulations, which terrified people. And yet this was going on at the same time as apparently there was a kind of insouciant attitude in Number 10. That's what infuriates and upsets me. Not so much that people may have had a drink. I can understand that. That's a human. That
one
can
rule
happen.
for them and another rule for everyone else.
Well, it's not just that. It's exactly what those rules were.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more, frankly. Well, what do you think? Let me know. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You're with GB News, of course, on TV and on DAB radio, and there's lots more still to come, including the latest on that ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis. But now, time for a short break. See you in a few moments.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're with Alex Phillips on GB News. Boris Johnson could become the first Prime Minister in history to be interviewed by police under caution. I mean, that's pretty crazy. Oh, yes, Tony Blair might have been hauled in front of the boys in blue as a witness, but the leader of the land breaking his own laws is totally unprecedented. But as wild as that sounds, is it curtains for Bojo if he gets slapped with a fixed penalty notice? What about the fact he told Parliament that there was no partying? Surely a Prime Minister can't just go about flagrantly lying to the country. Well, let's unpick it all according to the letter of the law so we can figure out what sort of chaos is likely to ensue over the next few days. I'm delighted to be now joined by Senior Research Fellow at the UK in a Changing Europe and former civil servant Jill Radu, who's a bit of an expert on these matters. Jill, what is the actual process if somebody misleads Parliament? Is that, a line in the sand, it's over, you're done?
Well, sort of, but it really rather depends because in the first instance, I mean, it's in the ministerial code. You're not supposed to mislead Parliament. A minister could go and apologise for misleading Parliament. The Prime Minister could choose to dismiss that minister for misleading Parliament because the Prime Minister is the ultimate decision maker on breaches of the ministerial code. It's the Prime Minister's code. He issues it. But of course, in this case, the person who misled Parliament, if he did, is the Prime Minister. So that's a bit difficult. So we go back to this thing that actually there are no obvious formal sanctions. There might be attempts to table motions of censure in the Prime Minister or something like that. But ultimately, it goes back to this question that we've been talking about all along, which is what do Conservative MPs decide to do? The Prime Minister could decide that he's misled Parliament and therefore he ought to resign. But he clearly doesn't think that he has. And even if Sue Gray makes it pretty clear that she does think he has, he might contest that. So if he decides, to do anything other than just voluntarily throw in the towel, then it will be down to Conservative MPs to decide whether they want to write those famous letters to Sir Graham Brady and trigger a no confidence vote.
And what about if the Prime Minister is proven to have broken the law, even if it is just a fixed penalty notice? I mean, that's unprecedented. So what on earth happens then?
Well, fixed penalty notices, there are sort of rules that if you have a sort of serious custodial sentence, you have to resign your seat. But a fixed penalty notice, it's like a speeding ticket. We don't expect MPs to stand down because they get a speeding ticket. And these £100 fines are in that sort of category of breach. So it per se doesn't trigger the Prime Minister, it doesn't trigger a recall vote or anything like that. So I think the Prime Minister could shrug off it, in that way. It comes back to the politics of the thing. At the time, the police were coming down with a ton of bricks on loads and loads of ordinary people because they were seen to be breaching the government's rules. What does it feel like for the guy who made those rules, who stood up and lectured us from the podium in Downing Street week in, week out, that we had to obey those rules for our own good if he's deemed to have broken them?
I mean, is there also a scenario that if the MPs decide that, his position's become untenable, the vote of no confidence happens, that he might be given at least a temporary reprieve and push this back into the summer recess, say, so we can actually deal with some of these emergent crises we're seeing unfolded, such as, that in Ukraine?
Well, there are three sort of options, I think, if the Prime Minister loses the vote of no confidence. He could stand down immediately, and there could be somebody who substitutes for him. So we could move to having a Dominic Raab. He's the named Deputy Prime Minister, could stand in, or someone else that the Cabinet agreed on should take over temporarily as Prime Minister if the Prime Minister just wanted to say, well, that's it, I'm off. He could stay on like Theresa May and David Cameron did as caretaker Prime Minister while the Conservatives go through that tortured process of a leadership contest. Alternatively, the Conservative Party, I don't think this is very likely, but the Conservative Party could agree instantly that there was just one person who was right for the job and installed them without going through all those agonised processes of whittling down to the last two and going out to the membership. Or they could, I think, collectively decide that, well, the Prime Minister's on his way out, but they don't want to do this very quickly and set out a very, very elongated timetable for the Prime Minister's departure. And that would, I think, have to be agreed between the Prime Minister and the 1922 committee of backbenchers. So we saw, normally you'd kick off the leadership contest pretty soon, but you could say, well, there are loads of crises going on. We want the Prime Minister to hang around. Though there are really interesting questions about, do you really want to hang on somebody who is, a lame duck at best, hanging on through all of those crises? And can you really not swap a Prime Minister in those? I mean, it might be better to move to a short-term Prime Minister, but would they then want to fight again for the day?
Well,
so it's all very difficult.
Lots of potential scenarios there, Jill. Glad you cleared that up for us. Thank you so much for your expert insight into all of it. Wow, what a pickle, eh? You're with GB News on TV and DAB radio. Let's get a check now on the GB News headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 2:34. I'm Rosie Wright here with you in the GB News newsroom. The Prime Minister's spokesperson has confirmed Number 10 hasn't received the Sue Gray report into alleged parties at Downing Street during lockdown, and they don't know if the inquiry has yet been completed. The Labour Party is demanding the report be published in full after Cabinet Ministers previously suggested the findings may be redacted for security reasons. European diplomats are trying to ease tensions between Russia and Ukraine during talks today in Paris. Moscow, which has around 100,000 troops on the border with Ukraine, has sent more fighter jets to Belarus, where it's been holding military drills. The US President Joe Biden has warned he'd consider personal sanctions against President Putin if Russia invades. New evidence shows the Prime Minister authorised the evacuation of animals from Afghanistan last summer, despite previous denials. Well, former Marine Pen Farthing, who ran a shelter in Kabul, campaigned to get his team out of the country when the Taliban seized control in August. In an email published by the Foreign Affairs Committee, it now reveals the government sponsored clearance for the charter flight. Police say a woman who was arrested on suspicion of murder after the death of a 5-year-old boy in Coventry is known to the family, but is not the child's mother. The boy was found with serious injuries at a property in Earlsdon yesterday afternoon. He was confirmed dead at the scene. Now, from Friday, people who test positive for coronavirus in Wales will be able to finish self-isolating after 5 full days instead of the previous time of 7. They will still need, though, to provide 2 negative lateral flow tests taken on days 5 and 6. In Northern Ireland as well, vaccine passports have been scrapped for pubs and restaurants, and nightclubs are now allowed to reopen for the first time since Boxing Day. You are up to date on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB Plus radio. A short break and then we'll be back to We Need to Talk About.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Welcome back to GB News on TV and, of course, DAB radio. It's still getting spicy in the Ukraine, folks, with the US sending an 80-ton shipment of missiles to the country, while Russia also continues to tool up. If this kicks off, it will be a pretty bleak conflict, with the current high-stakes brinkmanship leaving everyone guessing about whether Europe is about to be engulfed in a brutal war at any moment. The thing is, any efforts to deter Mad Vlad seem to fall apart the minute they are proposed, while poser Putin is hardly going to walk away from the fray without some sort of scalp. Frankly, it's a steaming mess, following years of woke, greeny policy in Europe playing right into the strategy of Russia's psychopathic game of chess, proving just how dangerous the liberal elite's yearning for a self-righteous virtue signalling really is for the rest of us. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by the former British ambassador to Russia, Sir Tony Brenton. Tony, thanks for being on the programme. What's your feeling? Yesterday, people were saying, well, it's all provocation, it's power play, it's power projection by Putin. But, well, people are shipping a lot of arms into Ukraine.
I know there's undoubtedly a real issue there. I don't think Putin wants to go to war, but he does want the West to move some direction towards the demands that he's made to the West. And he's making a lot of noise, and he's based a lot of troops around Ukraine as a way of demonstrating that he's serious. I personally still believe that there's not going to be a war. The Americans this week are going to respond in writing to the requests, the demands that the Russians have made. And I suspect that will then lead to a negotiation. But I could be completely wrong.
So playing this forward and the sort of demands that Russia might be making, I'm assuming they're regarding the growth of NATO and the positioning of troops near Russia's borders. Would that be concessions that we should be considering, or should we just say to Putin, absolutely not? You can't bully boy us.
Well, there are things that Putin is demanding which he knows we're not going to give him. I mean, we're not going to exclude forever Ukraine joining NATO. But the fact is that Ukraine is not going to join NATO for a long time anyway, because it's busily fighting its own civil war in the east. It's got a territory dispute with Russia in the south. Those have to be sorted out. So what we could do, and in my view ought to do, is say to Putin, OK, we can't agree to your demand as stated, but we can give you an undertaking that Ukraine will not join NATO for a decade or two. And if Putin is sensible, he will take that as enough and walk away. And, we'll be back to calm.
I mean, it seems to me Putin isn't sensible. He's a man who likes having photographs taken, riding horses topless and in little mini submarine pods. Sensible is not a word that I would necessarily put on the Russian leader. But surely, though, if he suddenly withdraws all those troops and we sort of fob him off with this Ukraine won't join NATO in 10 years, that looks like a bit of a capitulation for a man who seems to have a bit of a vanity complex.
Let me just respond to your first point. Putin is not stupid. He's a very cold, rational calculator of the Russian interest. I've negotiated with him. I've seen how he operates. And, OK, he rides around bare-chested on horses, but that's for his own domestic populace. Our politicians also do loony things in order to please our domestic populace. The fact is that in this negotiation, he's deadly serious. And I don't even know that an offer by us to hold off Ukrainian membership of NATO for 10 years, which is no concession at all, because that's not going to happen anyway, would be enough for him. It may well be that actually he's intent on launching a little war to demonstrate how serious Russia is. And it's worth remembering that if he does that, if there is a little war out there, it'll be bad news, there'll be lots of sanctions, all of that. But this is a nuclear power in the centre of Europe with the rottenest possible relationships with everyone around them. That is not an attractive proposition for any of us. And it is in all of our interests to get the heat down, to find a deal and to do it and begin to calm things down and to enter into a more rational relationship with Russia.
Sir Tony Benton, thank you so much for your expert analysis and insight into this ongoing crisis. Sir Tony Benton, who was, of course, former British ambassador to Russia. Well, let's talk now to Niall Gardner, foreign policy analyst at the US conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. Thanks for joining me, Niall. OK, American perspective on this. We have been talking about potentially going along with America and imposing sanctions on Russia, but there you have Germany basically cutting the concept down in its prime by saying things like the SWIFT system won't be involved. So, I mean, what sort of effect could sanctions have?
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Alex. And I have to say that, the Germans have been absolutely appalling with regard to the Ukraine crisis. They have implemented a policy of appeasement. They've been absolutely useless, I think, in terms of how they've been dealing with the Russians. And the Germans, needless to say, receive over 50% of their natural gas from Russia, and so they're heavily energy dependent. And this is a moment, of course, for strong US and British leadership on the world stage. And it is absolutely imperative that we approach the Russians from a position of strength and resolve. And that, of course, includes the application, or certainly the threat, of a wide range of economic sanctions, including removing Russia altogether from the SWIFT network if they decide to invade Ukraine. We cannot in any way, I think, strike some kind of deal. And I was listening to the remarks just now of the former British ambassador to Moscow, where he said we have to strike a deal with Putin. No, we don't, actually. We should not be making any kinds of concessions to Moscow. And this idea that we should make some commitment to exclude Ukraine from NATO for the next 10 years, for example, that would send completely the wrong message to the Russians. You cannot negotiate with Putin as though he's some kind of reasonable person to deal with. He is a vicious, evil tyrant. You cannot in any way make concessions to a brute like Vladimir Putin. And so this idea that we can strike some kind of deal with the Russians is just pie in the sky fantasy, really.
Niall, thank you so much for giving us a US perspective. There you go. You can't negotiate with a brute like Putin. Niall Gardner there from the Heritage Foundation in the United States. Well, going back to our Prime Minister, Boris is clearly in the doghouse, but don't worry, he'll have loads of equally miserable mutts to hang out with, having personally signed off on that flight that saw a plane load of pooches evacuated to the UK from Afghanistan, lest Buster's morning walkies fall into the hands of the wretched Taliban. Oh, forget all the women and girls about to be savagely oppressed, or the translators and soldiers that risked their lives helping our troops. Worse still, it's yet another thing the PM's spokesperson categorically denied. But there it is, in redacted black and white. Frankly, it's sickening that a man with the highest authority in the land could make such an awful judgment call. Weak, weak, weak. Well, joining me in the studio now is GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, just remind the audience of what went on at the time that Pen Farthing wanted to get his creatures shipped out of Kabul.
Well, this was in August during the height of the evacuation, and Pen Farthing, who, of course, ran this animal charity, was desperate to get his animals out. And whatever we say about the equating of animals and people, there are lots of people who care very deeply for animals and would probably back what Pen Farthing was doing. But he used his influence, that's true, to try to get those animals out. A whistleblower for the Foreign Office in December of last year said that that influence was used, that Pen Farthing had got special dispensation from the Prime Minister to have these animals shipped out from flights using military personnel at that airport in Kabul. The Prime Minister flatly denied that, said it was nonsense, that he had not intervened. What we have today is the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, who have been investigating this because of the issue of, look, were some people left behind? Now, Penn Farthing has said, no, people were never left behind, that this was a privately chartered flight. And so people were not being left off this flight. It was a flight for his animals in the first place. The debate now rages on, well, the military personnel who were involved in shepherding the animals onto the flight, could they have also been used better to shepherd people onto another flight? So it's all caught up in that. But the Foreign Affairs Select Committee have been investigating it. They have now got leaked emails which seem to be from an official within the office of Lord Goldsmith, who is the Foreign Office Minister. That seems to suggest in an email it's calling on the Foreign Office, a department official there, to look at the case of another animal charity, suggesting in that email that the Prime Minister has already given permission for Penn Farthing and his charity to get these animals out. So the finger is being pointed back at Boris Johnson here with regard to his credibility and whether he's lying when he said this was nonsense in the first place. I think as far as our viewers and listeners are concerned, they're going to say, oh, no, not again. Please stop this.
Stop
They're going to
it.
be tearing their hair out, shouting at the screens. I personally apologise. It's Alex that wanted me to talk on this particular issue today, but there you go.
Mark, thank you ever so much. Naughty man. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman. Has this enraged you, knowing that these stray animals were evacuated potentially instead of people?
Not yet, and that would be because I would like to do more forensic analysis on the email and particularly the chronology of this. So this is from an FCDO official on the 25th of August. Now, the official worked for Lord Goldsmith, and actually he's a peripheral minister, the Minister of State for the Pacific and International Environment, but one of his responsibilities is animal welfare. So then you'd have to go on to the 26th of August when the campaign manager for Penn Farthing said on that date, without knowing about these emails, that the Prime Minister and Carrie Fisher had intervened. The 28th of August, the Penn Farthing and his cats and dogs all came out. So the chronology fits. But of course, you don't know the hop searches of the emails. Just having an email from a peripheral FCDO office to someone else, which may have then hopped somewhere else in an email, doesn't actually prove anything at the moment. However, the one thing about the animals coming out is it doesn't really matter if it was a privately chartered plane that Penn Farthing used. The thing which was the pacing item of getting the humans out was the air traffic fleet. And it is, of course, not just the number of planes you can fly, it's the parking spots, it's how long it takes to turn them around, the security and all those things. So it's the opportunity cost of whether Penn Farthing's privately chartered plane meant that another plane couldn't get in to get other Afghan people out. And as we know, the pacing item being the air transport fleet, we could only have a flow rate of about 2,000 people per day. That meant that we did leave people behind. So it was the opportunity cost of did Penn Farthing's private flight mean other people could not get out?
I mean, we all remember the chaotic scenes at the airport when we were trying to evacuate as many people as possible. There were IS bomb threats. There were people risking life and limb just to get to the airport to try and be saved. And there was a huge debate at the time over whether it was remotely appropriate that in the middle of this sort of very quick countdown to try and save as many people as possible, we were even having a conversation about some stray mutts in Kabul. Surely if it goes back to the fact that if someone from the Prime Minister or close to the Prime Minister did sign this off and enable that to happen, I mean, that's just untenable, surely.
Yeah, I think in this case, you'd have to say it would go back to why is this lying politician lying to me? And 2's a pattern, 3's a trend. And if it is proven to be the case, then that would worry me. Because in crisis, and this was a crisis, 2 things really pertain. You want someone of competence and someone of character And generally in crisis, it's character which triumphs over competence. And if the character of the Prime Minister is degraded by these things, that's pretty damaging. But I have to say, if you remember back at the time, and I always recall that the RSPCA was founded in 1824, and the National Society for the Protection of Cruelty to Children was founded 60 years later in 1884. We seem to empathise often more with animals in this country than we do with people.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid I prefer people to dogs, I must admit. Major General Chapman, thank you so much for coming on and giving me your take on this. Now, Joanne, what do you make of it? I'm enraged by this. I'm enraged. I can't get over it if this is true. What sort of governance are we under?
Those scenes of the Western withdrawal from Afghanistan, both in substance and the manner in which it was done, they were shaming and they were horrifying. And I agree with you totally that at the time it seemed utterly bizarre, completely inappropriate, that we were spending really any time concentrating on this issue at all. And the idea that the Prime Minister has signed off on this or may have sanctioned it is, I just think it's absolutely appalling. I mean, it reflects very badly on him in a number of ways, if this is found to be the case. Not least because it makes him look weak and somewhat emasculated. One has to ask who's pulling the strings, whose priorities were these. It would appear to be other people in his family, perhaps, other people in government, but not of his seniority, because who else is of his seniority? And the other thing that really comes to mind for me is we heard not so long ago this absolutely damning testimony of the very brave whistleblower from the Foreign Office who spoke to the Commons Committee about this issue. And, you know, it was a sort of something that the media paid attention to for a few days and moments only. And since then, we've been completely consumed with all of this stuff about Partygate. Now, that, of course, plays into the bolster Boris people who would say, well, that's another reason why we can't be preoccupied with Partygate. But, you know, it rather suggests that it's a very sort of puerile culture in government and this very, very significant critique of the Foreign Office and not so much, in fact, in that case of ministers, but of the civil servants involved. We need to return to that. We need to make sure that that is acted upon.
Yeah, it does, like you said, seem to suggest a sort of chaotic, puerile atmosphere in 10 Downing Street. And who on earth in a crisis would even deign to contemplate shipping out dogs instead of people?
Well, I mean, we're trying to answer that question, aren't we? We're trying to answer who on earth would do that.
Honestly,
to many of us, it does defy any kind of logical explanation or rational explanation.
Joanne, that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for coming in and joining me today. Joanne Nadler, wasn't she superb? Well, that is, as I said, all we've got time for today. Do join me again, same place, same time tomorrow for We Need to Talk About on GB News. Coming up next, of course, it's The Briefing with Darren McCaffrey. But first, it's time for the weather forecast, and it's bye-bye from me.
Hello again. Dry and cloudy once more for most today, but overall, generally a little brighter than most days so far this week. A bit more sunshine around, but there will be some rain in the northwest being created by this deepening area of low pressure that's also going to bring some very strong winds tonight across northern Scotland. But let's deal with the weather fronts first of all, bringing some rain across the Highlands and the Western Isles and the Northern Isles later today. But elsewhere, high pressure is still in control, so most places dry. And as I mentioned, it's a little brighter, certainly over the Midlands, parts of eastern England, generally brighter skies compared to recent days with a bit of sunshine at times. And it's a bit warmer as a result as well. Where it stays gloomy, temperatures struggling, but generally up to